sanctuary churches. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about today, a little bit, this issue of sanctuary churches. We're going to touch a little bit upon ICE, what that's all about, what's taking place. So, looking at religious ethics versus government laws, sanctuaries, and what do we mean by that? Is this on? Testing.
Oh, yes.
All right. All right, there's a biblical background for refuge. As you might know, there is the Numbers 35 city of refuge that was set up, in the economy of Israel. And that was where there were 6 refuge, and then there was additional to that was 42 Levitical cities, 48 cities in total were together. And 6 of those were being cities of refuge. And these were cities for the Levites. That a person who committed an accident or killed somebody by accident could flee to the nearest refuge city. He was to, if he was acquitted by trial, he could stay in the city until the death of the high priest. If he left before that, then as the custom was at that time, manslayers could actually be killed by the avengers. So it was dealing with a way that things were done, especially back in those days. Other non-Israelite cultures also had similar laws. They also had similar refuge, mostly found in their temples and those kind of things. So it's a concept that's been around for an awful long time, is what I'm trying to say on that. Adventists has a history of being sanctuary. They supported anti-slavery measures. That the first GC president, John Byington, was an agent of the Underground Railroad, in fact. And he built a church and parsonages, hiding places on his place to take in freeing slaves. And that was in Battle Creek. The train kind of became an Underground Railroad center there for a while. And Adventists were also counseled by Ellen White not to uphold the fugitive slave law, which I'm going to talk about here in just a minute. A law that was made unlawful to harbor runaway slaves in northern free states, or they would suffer huge fines and penalties. They came out of the Compromise of 1850. 1850 was a compromise that had to deal with the land that was acquired after the Mexican War that Polk started to actually acquire more land for slave states. But when the land was finally taken from the Mexicans and we went all the way to the Pacific, there was a lot of compromise going on. What would these states do about slavery? Okay, after the Mexican-American War was over. Texas surrendered claims to New Mexico, to that territory. That was one part of this, quote, compromise of 1850. California was admitted into the Union as a free state. They allowed Utah and New Mexico territories to decide whether they wanted to be a free or a slave state, and those people of those territories decided they would be free in both territories. And the District of Columbia banned slave trade, but not all slavery. So those were some of the things that were coming out in this constant tension that was growing in this country over the issue of slavery. And as I said, it was Polk's determined effort to win that, all that land back that way. He really wanted to spread slavery all the way through there. So this is all part of those things. So the Fugitive Slave Act was part of this compromise, and it was much more stringent than some earlier acts that were similar to it. But Ellen White had some counsel to say on that. When the laws of men conflict with the word and the law of God, we are to obey who? God. Yeah, the law of God. Whatever the consequences may be. The law of our land requiring us to deliver a slave to his master, we are not to obey. Now, that would have meant jail. It would have been prison. It would have been fines at that time. That would have happened. And we must abide the consequences, she said, of violating the law. The slave, that's because of the principle here, the slave is not the property of any man. Amen. That was the position that we had taken. So that was what she was saying about that. Now, I want to be on a word of caution here as we go through this, because immigration issues are not issues of slavery or enslavement. Can you say amen? I want you to follow this real closely here. Therefore, this counsel of Ellen White must be taken in the context of our day, in the context of the situation. But what the counsel does infer is that there are times that the practicing Christian must rise above unjust laws to meet human suffering. Are you with me? Yeah. So there are those times. This is what I want to point that out. But now in this area of immigration, that becomes kind of a gray area in some of this. We'll get on to that a little bit. But in the past, individual Adventists during World War II, for example, showed this, there's a higher law that runs with Christians than what the government would do. Now, unfortunately, our church in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Germany at the time was kicking Jews out, for example, under pressure from Hitler. We were writing things that were praising Hitler. We were writing things in support of the Sterilization Act. The church wasn't acting too good. Okay, I'm not going to try to get into that history. I got a whole seminar on that history. But individual rose up to the occasion. Amen. So while even our corporate church is kicking out Jews from our congregation, can you believe that? That's what we were doing. Or be in trouble of, facing penalties from the government. That's what our church was doing. But there were individual Adventists who were not doing that. Over there is the Hazel family, in which they were hiding Jews. John Widener was one of the founders of the Dutch Paris Underground, who fled once the underground was exposed. He fled, lived out his days in California. They had an article about him running from death in June 26, 28 of Adventist Review. And then they had a story about his sister, Gabrielle, in July 25, 2013. She was also targeted by the Gestapo because of her brother. And they tried kind of very similar thing. Remember Marie Durand yesterday? And how they were actually going after them because her brother was a preacher of the French Protestants. Similar thing happened here. And the sad thing about Gabrielle's story is, well, there's a really encouraging part of it, is the fact that she knew the Gestapo was after her, but she didn't flee. And she told John, don't come after me. Okay, don't even attempt to come after me, because if they get you, they're going to kill you. That's all there is to it. So don't come after me. And after church, and it was really touching when we were on that Great Controversy tour 4 years ago, we went to the Northern French Union, is what it's called, and to the building of where she was worshiping in that very church. At that time, and the Gestapos did come, they did arrive, they arrested her there after church, and she went into concentration camps in which she subsequently died after that. But these are examples of individuals rising to the occasion of ministering aid in a correct way, in a way that violates human laws, okay? But that's because we have a higher ethic to work with. And so it's always encouraging to see that. Now, No More Deaths is an organization of activism. There's a guy by the name of Daniel Mills, back in 2008, was working for No More Deaths. It's a faith-based group that distributes water along well-known migratory routes in the Southwest, where the illegal aliens are coming up. Are you with me? Very hot desert. Many of them die. They're coyotes, as they're called, that transport them. Can sometimes just leave them in the car to die. Can you imagine that? I mean, it's just, they get paid a lot of money, and they put their hands in trust of these people, and some really bad things can happen. So, but anyways, they're going across the desert there. Lots of them die because of dehydration. And so these migratory routes, they were doing that in this one particular refuge. And he was arrested for littering, is what the idea was. What's interesting about the story is that even though they were going back and bringing out full bottles, they would take the empty ones and take them back with them. So it's not like they were leaving litter around. You follow what I'm saying? They were trying to keep the place clean. But they were just thinking about those people, in well over 100-degree heat, when the summer hits, that they could have water. They had access to that. So they arrested them. They didn't. The authorities didn't like what they were doing anyway, because they kind of see it as aiding and abetting this illegal immigration stuff. You follow what I'm saying? But they're really not. They're going to do it anyway. You follow me? They're going to do it anyway. They're just trying to meet the needs of the people that are feeling desperate to come over here. So anyway, he was exonerated of the garbage arrest and citation, and he never did anything wrong in depositing the plastic bottles. As I said, he was picking up the old ones. And in the New Testament, there's that humanitarian ethic, the Good Samaritan. Can you say amen? The sheep and the goats. What was the difference between the sheep and the goats? How they dealt with their fellow man. That was the difference. That's an amazing, I love the sheep and the goats one, because, you're not judging whether you keep the Sabbath or not.
Amen.
Or whether you tithe. You say amen? Or whether you were a faithful pathfinder.
Amen.
Or how many Bible studies you did.
Amen.
The judgment is purely on how we deal with people.
Yes.
Completely. And that's amazing. So our Sabbath keeping ought to say something about us. Amen? As far as being humanitarians to individuals. Because God doesn't care if you're keeping the Sabbath if you're mistreating your brother or sister. That's all there is to it.
That's right.
And so the bottom line in Christianity is how we are expressing God to others through our lives. Are we expressing Christ, or are we expressing something else? And that's the important thing. And that's what was happening with the Good Samaritan. Because even people who are not Jew can express what God does. Can you say amen? He takes care of people. Even people we would consider not good people. Can you say amen? Because God what? He brings the rain on the just and the just. No, this is the just and the unjust. Amen? I mean, he opens his hands to all. And that's the kind of spirit his own people ought to have. So this humanitarian ethic is very important to keep in mind. Now, no more deaths comes in the news just recently where Scott Warren was a faculty associate, or is a faculty associate at Arizona State University, long-time volunteer for those. Now, he was arrested in mid-January, charged with a felony of alien smuggling. Now, this is a little more serious than the earliest guy. He got caught for littering, but they're saying you're aiding and abetting. And what it was is they were in a well-known building called the Barn, and it was being surveilled. It's not like they were trying to hide anything. It was just this well-known building. They used it over and over again to help individuals. And you see what they did there. They would give them food. They would give them water. They provided them a little bit of shelter, a place to sleep. But they weren't harboring them. You follow what I'm saying? There's a difference in this. You know, watch where this law goes. And they would give them IVs if they needed for hydration. If they go. In other words, meeting humanitarian needs. These people are going to come over anyway for various reasons. And so he's trying to meet people who are being disadvantaged, people who are in trouble there. But the feds claim that they were actually smuggling. And they also think it might have been for retaliation of exposing the agents destroying water bottle stations, because they had just put out a video about that. But they also claim that Warren was not just hiding migrants, he was fully open. And Warren says it was a hiding migrants because he was fully open about the humanitarian actions. There was nothing sneaky about it. So that's a thing that's going on right now. People actually trying, because of the atmosphere of immigration today, you know, it can be misconstrued that if you're giving water to somebody, you can be arrested. But first of all, I think that you ought to give water to somebody. Amen? Rather than God is going to judge us based on how we take care of that person. And just because I give them a glass of water doesn't mean I'm necessarily agreeing with their illegal immigration attempts or whatnot. But so that's something to keep in mind there. There's another case in Springfield, Massachusetts right now too, where a mayor said that the church that was providing sanctuary for a mother and her child is to be sent back to Peru should lose its tax-exempt status, but because he saw it as a move by the church of harboring and protecting the immigrants. And the city council voted against him unanimously, saying, you better walk back those comments. And one of the councilors said that no mayor passes any edict telling any church what to do, particularly as it relates to the sanctuary. That's their position. So there's a bit of an uproar over, you know, how we perceive this issue. And churches are ones that the government was very reluctant to go into, unless there's an actual crime being committed. You follow what I'm saying? Something that's really taking place as a bona fide crime. So this is what's happening here, is this church providing this Peruvian and her daughter this kind of shelter, the sanctuary. As long as she stays there, she's supposed to be going back. But this resolution that they came up with here in Massachusetts was that city officials couldn't interfere with the religious freedoms of churches. That's really what they were calling it, was that churches can be sanctuaries and are to be sanctuaries, and they should be sanctioned as being illegal. But the federal law does say this. It is a crime for any person who, quote, knowing or in reckless disregard of the fact that an alien has come to, entered, or remains in the United States in violation of the law, conceals, harbors, or shields from detection. You see what different points there? Or attempts to conceal, harbor, or shield from detection such an alien in any place, including any building or any means of transportation. So they're pretty, they're talking about this shielding and protecting and secretly harboring them. That's a violation of the law. That's the immigration law. Now, the question becomes, when you're like this lady in Massachusetts, okay, they're sending her back to Peru. All right, well, now she's not a legal citizen. Okay. So you'd have to start asking some questions. What's the danger of sending her back? I mean, she's violating the law, right? If she went back, was she going to face some kind of, like you could say religious persecution, political persecution? There's a lot of different ways that you try to look at that because people come across to America for all sorts of reasons, right? So that's one of the things I think we'd have to look at. We'd have to consider, was her life Israelite? Because in a sense, that Church of Massachusetts is doing what this is saying not to do. I mean, it's really rubbing on the edges of that. And I think a church needs to be law-abiding, but a church also has that higher ethic that they need to take out. So at least what they need to do is examine what the Peruvian and why she's doing it and trying to figure that out. But that's what the law says. So here's some questions on the sanctuary, because what legal protections does a sanctuary, quote-unquote, designation provide to a church if you want to become a sanctuary? And none right now. There's no protections that we know of.
But does a church need protection? Does the church need protection?
Well, the idea you have protections from the law.
Right, but think about it. A church or Christianity should be your faith.
Or what?
Christianity or the church represent Jesus Christ,
right?
Which is about faith. Because there's going to come a time when it's going to conflict. So does the church needs that? Because
the issue is, that's what I want to come back to.
Okay.
If a church like is taking this Peruvian person, the question would be, why is this Peruvian person here? And if it's just because she needs a little bit of economic status, the question would be to ask, well, then does she deserve that kind of protection from not going back? Because it's just an economic status. You follow what I'm saying? As important as that is, right? But now, and that would be questionable. Would you be able as a church to legally be able to sanction something like that? But let's say the Peruvian is facing a certain death or something because of their beliefs. Maybe an actual threat down there, and the church holds for sanctuary for that person. Can that be legally looked at and maybe protected? We don't know. We don't really know right now how far the church goes as far as being, if you're going to get in trouble with the law or not. That's what I'm trying to say here, is that when you're trying to determine this, some churches may want to try to be sanctuary churches, but they need to be aware of, if they're going to be a sanctuary church, what you have to face.
Right.
Are you with me? That's what I'm trying to say here. Right now, there are no protections, in a real way. Does free exercise of religion, which you're coming to, because you were saying about faith, permit a church to provide sanctuary? Hey, we are, separation of church and state. That's really what they come into. Maybe, but it's not tested. We don't know, as far as the legal aspects of things. But what is most important to keep in mind, if you start a sanctuary church, okay, these are the three things that I picked out. Now, that paper she handed out to you answers these questions much more than I am not at all expert in this area. But it's an area of really interest to me, especially after the guy got arrested in the desert there, for providing the means of taking care of people, got my interest. But I don't know all the ramifications on this. But it does say, if you're going to become a sanctuary church, you better consult a local attorney familiar with immigration law. And that's always very important to do that, okay? Because I had somebody on my Facebook really argue with me over the decision on the banning of Muslims, okay, that went against Trump. And he's frustrated because he feels like, the idea is correct. How can you have illegal immigration over here? How can you be doing this? And I had an immigration lawyer step up to the plate and say, because there's Supreme Court precedents that we treat immigrants carefully, okay? And so what I shared was, I said, America sees itself as a humanitarian, we kind of promote human rights if we possibly can. Can you say amen? And so we have this, we want to have the treatment of immigrants in a good way. And so that's why the courts were not going against the Constitution in ruling against Trump's order to get rid of, well, basically expanding Muslims. That's what it basically boils down to. He's done it 3 times now. He's been shot down 3 times. I don't know how many times he's going to keep trying. But the point of it is, in that argument, it took an immigration lawyer to say, yeah, this is it. So it's good to have an immigration lawyer. And if you're providing shelter, you've got to inform the immigrant that staying at the church does not give any special legal protections. It doesn't. It's just you're at my church, you're going to take your chances just like we are. Okay? And then you have to let your staff know, and church members and volunteers are properly trained about this so they keep themselves out of a legal tangle, perhaps, as far as how they're treating them. So because this is kind of a new thing lately, because of the executive orders that are going on, because there's such a strong feeling in the nation in many places about immigration, we're starting to face these questions about sanctuary churches, And as you know, there was a lot of immigrants left, I mean, even during Obama's administration, Obama was called deporter-in-chief.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, he deported a lot of people. And it caused a lot of trouble with our Spanish congregations because people were fleeing, because there was that. It's just a different spirit of how it's being conducted, I think, is what the difference is, why everybody's upset with Trump.
What is
Yes.
the Seventh-day Adventist Church's stance on this?
We don't have a stance on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's more, I think the stance will be, okay, let's stay within the law. But the thing of it is, the law's not clear. Okay, so there's nothing really protecting that. I think the church would come down and say, we need to definitely look at this and see how far we can go with it. Yeah.
If you could speak for a moment on the idea of the Catholic Church, who is very outspoken in this sanctuary church idea.
Yeah.
I was told that the Catholic Church comes under the Vatican rule, and if they bring somebody into their church to offer them sanctuary, that they are protected under the Vatican statute, and that the government cannot come into a Catholic church and pull them out.
I haven't heard that, so there's no way I can comment on that. That would be the first I've heard about the Vatican, because you're talking about the Vatican in the state, in the sort of a state, instead of a church, which the Vatican is both church and state, correct?
Right.
You've got that little parcel of land there. I don't know about that sovereignty extending into the churches into America. I've never heard that before. My guess is it doesn't. But that's my guess. I don't know. That's an interesting argument, though. It's an interesting argument. I just don't think you could do it because you're in another country. That's another. You're in another sovereignty. The Vatican sovereignty as a country doesn't extend, I don't think, through the church channels. That's what I'm trying to say. I find that interesting.
If your sovereignty is with government, then your government embassy, which would be the Vatican churches, would fall under that purview.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. I'm just giving you an idea on that. I just haven't heard it. I don't know how that works. But of course, they're very, Francis is very concerned about the immigration situation, because worldwide. And we've had such a mass exodus of immigrants now because of disruption, especially in the Middle East and those kind of things, causing all sorts of problems within other countries, like in Europe, destabilizing them. That's why we have such a... Immigration is probably the most important event, a global event that's happened today, as for the purpose of why there's the rise of nationalism in so many other countries. Yeah, that's probably the main reason. And immigration has been very big in America. And that's why nationalism and populism has been very popular here, with this notion that our jobs are being taken away and all this kind of stuff. And the thing I say is that I don't see any Americans rushing to the watermelon fields to help harvest. Can you say amen? I don't see a lot of Americans, signing up for janitorial jobs. All that stuff is done by guess who? Immigrants. That's right. And let me tell you how we like it. This is the thing that's really crazy about this whole immigration thing. First of all, America is a nation of, guess what? Immigrants. And ever since the first immigrants came and decided that they were going to be a country, they've had it hard for every other immigrant that wants to come in. Go figure. Okay. Protection of turf or whatever, I guess. And so this whole thing on immigration is somewhat of a strange one. I lost my thought. I'm digging quick here. I had a really good thought. It was really good. But it'll come back to me here in a moment. Does anybody have another question? Because that might just stimulate me to that thought. Yes?
So isn't the church talking out of both sides of this mouth if we're expanding our work among Hispanics but not picking up a position on immigration?
Well, what kind of a position on immigration do you want us to take?
Well, like I said, the Catholic Church is taking, other churches are taking a position that we should provide humanitarian aid. At least the church would say that.
Well, yeah. I mean, but the issue is what's within the law. You know, so you're just going to take your chance at this point. That's all there is to it. I mean, the church can say anything it wants. If you got certain laws that you got to abide by, that's the issue that you got to deal with. And so, I was going to tell you, yeah, immigration is good for America, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why is because, especially with big labor, that's the thing that gets me is big business likes them, especially your automated, like your agricultural processing farms and things like that. I was talking to an Adventist who owns a tree planting service. You remember back in the 80s when tree planting became kind of this thing? You know, the young people would go to the summer and they'd plant those thousands of trees, you know, to help their tuition. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And so that was all, guess what, back in the 80s, it was all a bunch of Caucasian Adventists. Basically, I was doing it. I mean, there were some African Americans, I'm sure, down there, you know, doing that stuff for 3 cents a tree. Can you imagine? You got to plant a lot of trees to make some money. Are you following me now? Now, today, he owns a company that he was working for. And guess what? The only thing he's got is immigrants. And you know how much they pay him now? 3.5 cents. They got a 0.5 cents raise in 30 years. So what does that tell you? Big business loves it. Keep the labor cheap. That's the idea. I reap the profits by keeping it cheap. And I mean, in Utah, 25% of us in Utah were immigrants. Why? Because there's a lot of agricultural assembly type of things in Utah, and they love it because they can pay them really cheap, and they're not gonna argue.
But is that fair?
No, it's not fair. But don't be telling me that big business, you know, it's ridiculous, the arguments. I mean, they really are. And there are a few places that immigrants take any jobs than Americans, I guarantee you. Because Americans ain't going to take those jobs. Are you with me? Yeah, I mean, how many high schools are you going to see, you know, go in those high schools and say, hey, look, we got tree planting services. You know, we got rid of all the illegal immigration, and we got people that got to plant trees. You're going to come out and plant 3 cents a tree? Ain't no way. And that's what he said to me. The owner said, well, yeah, the only way you'll probably get an American out there is if you pay them 12 cents a tree. I said, you got it. You know, that's what it is. You know, so they can keep them so cheap. And that's the thing that drives me crazy about the immigration thing, is that number one, I don't see them taking any jobs. And number two, not jobs that Americans would want to take, let me put it that way. And that they actually end up contributing to this, the economy by pay this, some of them actually pay some taxes, and if they're not getting it under the table, you know. Now, there are dangers with illegal immigration as well. And something that is a concern, and that is illegal immigrants are at a great disadvantage, especially women. There has been a number of reports lately about immigration women that do the janitorial work for big buildings and stuff, having a problem with being raped and sexually abused and things like that because they're very vulnerable. Their handlers take advantage of them, and they don't say anything because they're what? They're illegal. And so there are some bona fide issues, you know, that come with this illegal immigration that is very tragic. Anyway, enough of my hobby horse on that one. It's a crazy argument we've got going on out there. But we've always had a problem with immigrants. Today it's from south of the border or coming from Muslim countries. You know, yesterday it was Catholics. Yeah. So here's some conclusions. Again, we're not in a situation like slavery back in the 19th century, okay? Illegal immigration is a different issue. And we've got to be wise, we've got to be deliberative, we've got to be careful in exploring the possible ramifications of what we're doing and why we're doing it. We should uphold just laws, right? But always provide service within the law to humanity, no matter where their status is, to at least help people, okay? But not necessarily stand out and break the law. Are you with me? Because it may not be a wise thing to do. It might be a just law. Unless there's a clear and present danger that an immigrant going back to the country of origin will leave them targets for abuse or death due to political status, religious belief, or ethnic origin, that could probably be a judgment call, obviously. But those are the areas I would think that we would have to examine. Amen. Are you with me? On whether or not that person should go back, or if they should find sanctuary in our churches and be able to stay without getting any kind of legal repercussions on that. So I'm not an authority in this area, okay? So what I say here is just take it with a grain of salt. I just gave you what the law was, and I told you that, you know, and the BJC thing I think has done a very good job to give you, basically it's what they said. Look, if you guys are going to do this, you're going to get an immigration lawyer, then you better train everybody, figure out how you're going to do it, and then go from there, okay? And so that's what we're trying to do. So I guess we can leave with questions and answers, yes, by bouncing question mark. All right.
Is there how, if any, way that you can help an immigrant person? If you know they're over here illegal, and you go and try to help them, wouldn't you be assisting them in their?
Well, that's the problem with why the guy in the desert got, you know, arrested. Yeah, you have to be very careful dealing with immigrants. I mean, if you're taking them in personally and you're in some ways aiding, abetting, and sheltering, you know, secretly concealing, you know, all that, you know, we saw that back here. Remember this? This is the wording of the law. Enters and remains in the United States in violation of the law, conceals, harbors, shields from detection, and that kind of stuff. Yeah, you're putting yourself up for a legal problem. Yeah. That's the thing you have to keep in mind. Yeah.
When I was a young person, like 17, 18, I worked for the forestry in California planting trees.
Yeah.
Making $7 to $10 an hour depending on the grade, the incline of the mountain. And I actually made less money than the people being paid 3 cents a tree, because they could plant way more trees than me, you know, because they had the incentive to go faster. Those of us getting paid by the hour, we just took our time because we knew we weren't getting any more.
Yeah.
So
well, that was California for you.
Yeah, that was California. In the South, I know it's a little different, but
Yeah, South did it a lot different.
yeah.
Yes.
Are there any Adventist churches that actually are sanctuary?
I don't know. I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that. I think there might be, but I can't tell you that.
Would the church lawyers protect someone who was doing that?
Well, only if it's within the law. I mean, and that's what this is coming back to, is like the questions that I had was, and they come mainly out of this, is, you know, do you have them? None that we know of right now. So, you know, our lawyer's not going to be able to do anything because there's really no protections that we know of right now.
Is this similar to back when is this similar to back when blacks were being they were running from their masters and
I don't think it's similar. I think this is different. You've got people coming in for all sorts of reasons. Okay. But they're not escaping slavery. They're not escaping, you know, those
they
kind
just want
of
to be
things.
free.
They just, well, no, they want a better life.
A better life. They want a better life.
It's not that some of them don't enjoy freedom, they just want a better life. Not a lot of good opportunities down there south. Yes.
Also said at Grady Hospital, there's a safety net hospital.
Uh-huh.
And I'm in the ICU, and you can tell when we have undocumented immigrants come. They don't have dialysis. You're supposed
supposed to get Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So basically, all we can tell them is, okay, when you start feeling this way, just come. And we can't deny them dialysis.
Right.
You feel sick, so you come in, and I'll get the report, you know, if they're really bad, put them in the ICU, and, you know,
Yeah.
patch them up. And with that, of course, you get shelter, you get some food.
Yes,
and-
for a little bit,
and
right.
then when you're discharged, we have no idea, you know, where they go.
That's right.
And so I, as a physician, I feel kind of conflicted
Oh, yeah.
with that, because I can't say, okay, you're gonna need dialysis on Wednesday, but I can't say come back.
Correct.
We can just tell them, okay, we give them a list of things, and if you show up at the emergency room, they can't deny you.
So not
So
only
maybe the
does,
church can come to, I
Yeah.
don't know now, I
no,
could say to some church members, hey, you know what, here's an undocumented person, when they get discharged, meet them outside the ER.
I know, you might be, it depends, you see, you might get into that harboring
That's right.
situation, so I'm not gonna, and again, I'm not an attorney on this, so I want you to let you know, I'm just giving you the information that I know about. So don't take me as the gospel here. If I had an immigration lawyer here, he could probably, you know, kick me in the seat of pants and say, Kevin, that was not correct. You're gonna do that. But generally speaking, I think I have it right, is that as far as sanctuaries are, there aren't any protections at this point to be able to do what that federal law is talking about. And also, there's a free exercise of religion, like we say, we're going to claim that, you know, this is a church-state thing, so if they come into our side, you know, we're separate. Well, that hasn't been tested, and there's no idea about that, so we'll have to see. The thing of it is that religion, you know, religion cannot be used to foster illegality. Are you with me? Especially if they're just, you know, if they're a just law, you know, we need to follow the law. You follow what I'm saying? If it's just. Now the question is, what's just and what's unjust? And you know, you'll have those arguments. But religion can never be an argument for breaking the law. Okay, that might be good. That's important there. Because there's no such thing as absolute freedom or an absolute right. You know what I'm saying? There's no such thing. So I have religious freedom up to the point that I want to commit a human sacrifice. Are you with me? I'm not free to take and kill somebody, you know, because it's in my religion. See, so that isn't going to happen. All right? And so there's no right that's an absolute right. There's always some kind of regulation to it that's taking place. Yes?
Do you know why? I mean, everybody just came over here. I doubt if anybody alive today, parents way back in the back that came over with pilgrims. Do you know why they won't allow them to come legally over here?
Who's that?
The ones that they're putting in jail, the immigrants we're talking about here.
Why are they coming?
Why won't they,
Why the government?
why the government won't find a way or allow them to come in?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it's illegal for you to come into the United States without the proper documentation.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So do they have the opportunity to, is it too expensive for them to get covered?
Well, I think part of it is the path to citizenship is convoluted and crazy. That's why it is. It's incredibly complicated because there are certain, for example, there are certain ethnic groups that have priority over others based on certain metrics. And so you have what we call the lottery thing, where you can allow so many to come in and get a green card and that kind of stuff. So it's illegal for you to come in if you haven't come through the legal avenues that allow you to be here. And it's illegal for you, and most of them, by the way, as I understand it, most of our illegals are the ones who've overextended their stay from actually getting here legally in some ways. So there's a large swath of that. So that's the kind of thing we're dealing with. It's a very, very complicated thing. And I mean, illegal immigration and immigration is an important aspect. You know, I mean, there's reasons that countries protect their borders. You know, you just can't have everybody just pouring in, you know. So they try to be selective and helpful, knowing that America is a very coveted place to come. And we've tried to do what we can to be human, but there's a lot of people who don't like the lottery process. There's other people who want to do something else. And it's a very complex and convoluted situation. That's one thing I do know. for them. I mean, it's a long haul to try to get the citizenship too. Yeah, very long haul. And a lot of it has to do with money. A lot of it has to do with, you know, what is your status? You know, if you're coming over here and you've really got no status, you really got no money, your chances of remaining are probably slim, unless you did something to come over and go to school and become a, you know, something in biochemistry or whatever, you know, and you happen to be in a job that that America covets and wants to have employed. That would be really the only reason that you would be able to stay. The other reason they consider is maybe there's a religious persecution that will allow you to stay, or there is a political persecution allowing you to stay. They can, you know, determine that way as well. But I do know one thing, that when immigrants come over, my wife and I are starting to get involved with immigration over in, or actually refugees over in Clarkston. It's a huge, you know, metropolis of where immigrants land. And I've learned a lot of stuff in there. One is that the immigrants that come have waited a long time. We got immigrants that are there that the immigrants were born in the camps over there. So it's very difficult to come in on number one. When you get here, they kind of let them come on shore, and then they assist them for 3 months, and they have to have a job. They have to meet all this criteria, and then when all that's done. And so you're just hoping now that you can keep yourself going, sustaining yourself. You're just hoping you can, and then be able to go through the process of becoming a citizen. It's a pretty rough situation. I'm really amazed at what refugees go through. We have refugees that we're dealing with coming out of Myanmar. And as you know, there's several different groups in Myanmar. The Rohingya, which are Buddhist, are the ones that are fleeing over to Bangladesh. You're hearing a lot about them now because they're being almost in a genocidal way. The Buddhists are trying to take care of them. But there's the Karen population, which is big where we're at. They have a lot of heavy-duty issues that they have to come through for persecution for all sorts of reasons. And I talked with one young man who's been here now for a number of years. He's been going to one of our Adventist schools. We're working with a lady who has worked very hard to take some of these children and get scholarships from out of Georgia to be able to go to our private school. And because oftentimes when they go to public schools, they're ridiculed, they're bullied, because they can't speak the language, they look different, and they don't know the ways of American lifestyle or whatever, so they're odd. And you know how it is. I mean, kids can be some of the cruelest on the planet sometimes. And so she tries to get them into private school so they keep the bullying part of it down. I remember talking to one kid now, he's almost to where he's going to be graduating soon, and I noticed he had a burn at the side of his neck. He'd been burned. And I don't know where that came from. I didn't ask, I didn't get into that. But the hardships that these kids come to is just phenomenal. I mean, it's pretty poor. I mean, and what's amazing to me is how much money these landlords are getting from these pathetic situations. But it doesn't have to be pathetic. It's really interesting if you see the different kinds of individuals. For example, we were going through and we could see, you could look inside the rooms, and most of them were kept pretty nice. They were pretty nice apartments. You could look inside, people were, relatively, clean and all that kind of stuff. But we peeked our head into another place where there's a Muslim, they're teaching the Quran. The kids were sitting on the floor, actually boys, and they're sitting on the floor and they're teaching the Quran. Man, I'll tell you, that was a spick and span room. I mean, it was very, very clean. So it doesn't have to be chaos and a mess. It depends on where you're coming from and what you've learned in the past and all that kind of stuff. But the hardships are amazing, and I think that a church, that's one place where churches can engage. We've had a lot of churches engaging with this program called Free in what did I just say, Clarkston. I want to call it Cartersville, Clarkston. And so you want to remember those refugees. But that's giving me a real taste of this immigration thing, refugee thing. There's huge obstacles out there for them to face. I mean, it's phenomenal. What's amazing to me is that things must be pretty bad back home for some of these immigrants, for the things they've got to put up with in order to be here. Okay? That's all I got to say. I've never lived in their situation, but I'll tell you the situation they face here, it must be pretty bad back there, because they have to really put up with a lot. And immigrants always have put up with a lot in America, and it's just always been that way. All right, Ian, yes.
I have a question. Is there any advice, for instance, you said you went, I know this Clarkston area because I work with them. When it comes to the Quran and Muslim and immigration, we know that, especially with Sharia law, there are women, and like you said, girls, who are still subjected to, and I'm sure, subjected to some of the things that we feel are almost like slavery. That, you know, do you, as far as an Adventist church, how would you advise, say, a church if we know about that? If we have meetings, even if we say, okay, let's have a women's group and we bring the women over, I think sometimes when they go back, then, you know, if they're new ideas, they try to express new ideas, they're subject to either abuse or rape or whatever. How would you advise an Adventist church to kind of do something, you know, provide some program? Because that does happen.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in some situations, you know, people make decisions for the truth that are going to put them into problems. And that may be a place where you might want to shelter somebody, you know, or move that person into another, you know, into like a women's shelter, for example. I mean, if they're facing possible beating or abuse or something like that, then probably, you know, direct them to a women's shelter or something like that. That would be probably one of the best ways to do it. Yeah. Yes.
I think your point that you made in the beginning needs to be well taken. Getting legal and professional counseling is tremendous, because you got to realize that the church is not made up so much of just the local. This is worldwide. The NAD, our national, has to address those issues. When they're handled out of hand, it becomes a worldwide issue that points at the church as a whole. And taking in immigrants for whatever the case might be a good thing, but it can get us into a area where, you know, with the government, it can be so.
Yeah, you have to try to stay within the government laws. That's right. I mean, Adventists are providing a lot of humanitarian aid and within legal bounds, you know, in some of these other countries in Europe. So we're not the only ones doing that kind of stuff. So the Adventist church over there is doing that. So yeah, I think it is. I think you just have to look at the legal aspects of it and try to work from there.
Exactly.
All right. Yes.
So, Elder James, I want to thank you all. It was excellent presentation. So but like I'm women's ministry director for the South Atlantic Conference. So I was thinking, if I'm listening to all this, I said, okay, so what is the bottom line for me? What am I telling the women? What are we doing during this time? If we summarize all of this in our mind, where should we be in this point right now, preparing ourselves? And I like the quote what Ellen White said, that the only thing we have to worry about is to forget where the Lord has brought us so far. But still, what would your summary be? What would you say?
You mean the summary?
As far as us getting ready now or whatever, what should we be doing now?
Getting ready is a daily thing.
Right.
And, you know, I think that basically the way that we prepare for the end is prepared today in making, always drawing closer to our Savior, making sure He's number one in all of our life, directing our life, having the Holy Spirit set the agendas in our lives as much as we can, as much as we are aware of, but growing in this, this focus on becoming more like Christ. That's really what I think is, and being available for God's errands. I think that's important, is who can we meet? Like I remember one time in God's errands, I'm a kind of I'm a penny pincher. My daughter's even worse. I feel so bad that I cursed her in that. Because I try to help her, you know, on some things, but she's just, But anyway, I was, it's funny, this shows you how the Lord can work even when you're not doing so good. Can you say amen? Are you going to follow this now? So, you know, you ask God, Lord, you know, what can you do to use me today? You know, and that's a prayer that sometimes pray very reluctantly, but I try to do it as often as I can, because you don't know what you're going to get involved in. But, I want to be a help, and so one time, it was about Christmas time, I'm standing behind a lady who had a child, young lady, young child, and she's having to use food stamps. And she's got this baby formula out. She's had about 4 cans of this baby formula. Now, being a father, I know about baby formula. We used to buy that all the time. So she kept going through these food stamps that were the wrong date. They were going to be in the future, if you follow what I'm saying. She run out of the thing that there's a timing within those things, at least in Georgia. I didn't understand it completely, but then I got to see, she kept handing her. And the lady kept, no, we can't use that one. I'm in a hurry. It's Friday.
Oh, yeah.
The sun's going down. See, here we go now. You follow what I'm saying? The sun's going down. And this lady is holding me up. And I'm trying to be nice. This has gone on for about 15 minutes. I'm looking at my watch. I don't know why I didn't get out of line. Well, I had some other people behind line on me, I think it was, and I'm just thinking, well, this can't take too much longer. And so she finally quit and left the baby, the formula, because she couldn't get everything. And so she started leaving, and I said, wait a minute. I said, I was just looking at that little child and looking at her, and people that do food stamps, and I can kind of tell with that, she kind of looked embarrassed. Are you with me?
Oh, yeah.
She just looked like, I don't really want to do this. My dignity is being jeopardized here. That touched me. And so I'm getting ready for Sabbath. And so she moved on, and I thought, she left the cans, and I said, no, I'll pay for them. Ma'am, hold up. I'll pay for them. I'd had a $5 purchase, I think, or something. I don't even know what it was now, some last minute silly thing. But you realize how ridiculous your feelings are as you see this presented before you. And I'm worried about the Sabbath. Forbid that I would get in too late. Now, I believe in keeping the edges of the Sabbath. Don't get me wrong. You follow me? But sometimes our priorities are messed up. You say amen? We as Adventists, we think that we're going to heaven because I've got a better deal in keeping the Sabbath. Just like I said, the sheep and the goats just say nothing about our Sabbath keeping. Now that should sober all Adventists up right there. You say amen? Should have got me right there in that line, because what God is interested in that young mother and that child of hers in need of something, and she is as embarrassed as they can be. And Christ always worked with people in engendering into them dignity and worth, despite what their circumstances. He even engendered dignity to Judas Iscariot. He showed Judas every day he loved him. He showed Judas every day he had dignity. But Judas just didn't end up responding. You know how this goes. This is the way Jesus functioned. And so I bought this stuff. Boy, was that expensive. I didn't realize that stuff got so expensive. And the Lord said there is sacrifice. It was $60-something. And for my $5 purchase, what do I say to my wife? My wife was touched by the story. That was a good thing, But I really learned a lot. The funny thing is, I haven't missed a meal since then.
Come on.
You say amen? With the things we think are so important. What was important was that woman. That's what God was interested in. So God can even use us when we're not doing so well. You see amen? I didn't jump right up. It took me some moments to try to get myself to become a Christian. And I hate to confess express that to you, but that's what I did, you know. It's just like, you would think you would be more natural at it, you know. And I mean, that night I sat thinking, I said, Lord, God, you know, just,
What is he gonna say?
what a defeat. You know what I'm saying? Is that, and thank you, Lord, you know, for your kindness. But that should be the first thing we should do, is to be able to identify the need of humanity. Not worried about my Sabbath keeping, worried about humanity. Where are they at? How are they hurting? And in the whole process of trying to observe the Sabbath, are you with me? I mean, because Jesus wasn't an outright Sabbath breaker as such. You know, he was always on the humanitarian side of things, and always erring on the side of that. Yes, brother, you had a question.
No, a point that you made. That's what Jesus was trying to do when he do the Samaritan story.
Yeah.
You know, the priest passed by, the rabbi passed by.
Yeah.
But the Samaritan, which was despised,
Yes.
he had a humanitarian in his heart.
Yes.
You know,
Exactly.
and also to one thing, we need to pray and ask the Lord to give us a spirit of discernment.
Right, yes.
So that we could discern where the needs are.
Sure, absolutely.
And respond accordingly.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that is important. But if you're going to buy baby formula, do it with a cheerful giving.
Amen.
Amen. I did eventually. I just thought it was like, wow, $60. It's been a long time since I've been out here. I'm a young father. So anyway, yes.
You know, I like what Brother Martin said, because it's very true. I'm originally from Minnesota. And in Minnesota, we have the highest population of Hmong.
Yes,
From
you do.
Laos and many other countries like that have immigrated here. But also we have the highest population of Ethiopians.
Oh,
And in that culture, I used to work for a hospital that was affiliated with the University of Minnesota.
okay.
And the women, the Ethiopian women that came in there, they were very angry when they would go to give birth to their children and so forth, because of the freedoms that we as African Americans and whites had in Minnesota. It's a completely different culture to them. And even though they're in different communities and so forth, you know, where they support each other,
Yeah.
the freedoms that we as women have in this United States, we don't have to wear the head covering like they do, like they're required to do. So you really have to ask for discernment, because it's very difficult to befriend them at times.
Yeah.
Because it's such a foreign country for them to come into.
Yeah.
And so you have to be very careful. What you might think you may be helping them
Yeah.
could really
Exactly.
be offending them in many ways. So you really have to ask for discernment.
You
But
do.
some of the nurses in that hospital took so much abuse from those women, and it's because of what they've been subjected to.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We have to, that's a learning
Yes.
curve, you know, and understanding, you know, that's why we need to get to know people and
Right.
not try to think we know what people need. Are you with me? But to try to keep in mind that there are different views of hospitality, how you respond to. Because, you know, I mean, not all women are against the head covering, for example. As a matter of fact, some are very proud to have for their faith. They're not at all against it. So we have to be discerning. I think we just have to be careful and not just, you know, think we have the answer every time. All right, well, question of what else we need to do, Moses? Are we, Brother Moses, are we over time here, or what are we doing?
No, we are right.
Okay,
Time.
all right. Probably want to make a general call to question and answer.
Yes, yes. We'll do that at this particular time. Let's give another part, amen. Amen. It's been a good day. It's been a long day. We've covered so much. But we're going to take the next 10 minutes or so, and if there's any questions that you would like to ask any of the presenters, you can do so at this time. And if not, we will conclude and allow you to go and get your dinner, your box lunch, and we can conclude. Is there any questions or any comments? All right.
Do you have any suggestions as how those of us who've been here going back to a local church could do something that will promote religious liberty? What are the steps that you think we need to take in order to get that done in the local church?
Yeah. What can you do? All of that information. I have some ideas that I think we certainly need to. The one thing that we don't want to do is go back to our churches and be silent. We can't go back to our church and sit in the corner and not have. You need to go back and you need to have some type of program where you're going to discuss and talk about the things that you have learned here. So you need to do that. You need to go back and you need to have a special afternoon, Sabbath afternoon, where you can talk about some of the issues here. One of the other things that you can do is begin to take a look at some of the areas that you can magnify in your community that will go along with some of the things you've done here. And because you're not going to be able to do everything. But you need to focus on those things you can do and do them well. Okay? Right. Thirdly, you can always call if you want to get me to come, and I can do programs in your church where we can talk about some of these issues that we have dealt with here. I'll be more than happy to do that. You can get on my calendar. I will be more than happy to do that. Now, fourthly, if there's anything that you want to do, and if I cannot come, we can also look to see if there's others who can come in to do that, to give you input on that. But the one thing that you don't want to do is go and be silent. Okay? There's no room for couch potatoes in the churches. Ellen White talks about that. That is not a safety zone to have all this knowledge. You know, knowledge is dangerous. Knowledge is dangerous, and it's going to be a witness against us in the judgment if we take all of this knowledge and go back and sit on it. We must be engaged. We must be active involved. I certainly hope that helps. Now, if there's any others that would like to comment on that, I would love to hear from you, okay? If not, let's take this. I see your hand here, okay?
Yeah, one of the reasons I was mainly concerned, make sure I come to this meeting, because when you came to our church, you made a point that there's other matters more in addition to just Sabbath, privilege and whatnot. And I want to get that, and I've got this here, but I'm a very slow note taker. And to contribute all this to memory is very complicated. So I would love to relate to the church family what I've heard here. It's very powerful. But I cannot put it in some kind of context when I can remember all the things that.
Okay.
So I wonder if we got some handouts, but some things that very vital and timely.
Okay.
I would love to be able to share with our folks back.
One of the things that you can do is, I think the presenters already said, if you want to get the information, you can get it. They'll be more than happy to share that. But one other thing that you can do is that you can go back, talk with your pastor, and tell him what you experienced here, and ask him if he would invite them to your church. Amen. They'll come to your church. I'm sure that they wouldn't mind doing that. I'll come. They'll come. You can do that, and they can give you more information when they come. They have full schedules. Okay, so you have to be intentional. All right, but just don't go back and do nothing. You can do a lot. There's a lot that you can do, and you can get the information. Okay, you can get just do what they told you. Contact them, and they'll be willing to share the information that they gave you. All right, and at some point, talk to your pastor. He can invite them to come, and he can make a big weekend, big day out of it, and I'm sure that they wouldn't mind coming. All right? Yes?
I'm a communications leader for our church, and with Kenny being the religious liberty person in the church, I would put like a blimp in there that maybe this Sabbath he's going to, for the bulletins, he's going to do a 15-minute, talking, or when he had his religious liberty days coming up, I would make sure I publicized it a month in advance. So get with your communications leaders.
Absolutely. That's exactly what you need to do. And I think it was said earlier, utilize that which you have there. If you have your bulletin, keep religious liberty quotations and things going in there. If you don't have a bulletin board, ask your pastor to see to it that you get a religious liberty bulletin board. And you can decorate it and put all of the things on there related to religious liberty, and you can change it out every week, every month, however you want to do it. You can keep the quotation things going. These are some things you can do, and it would be a blessing to your church, it would be a blessing to you. You can even have a religious liberty newsletter. You know, you can start that and set that up in the church. Have your communication department of the church to help you to set up a newsletter. And in there, you can put different ideas and things in there that will keep the people informed of what's going on in religious liberty. I got to tell you, you'll never run out of material. Every day that you open up your eyes, something is happening in the world that's affecting religious liberty. Every day. And as long as it's our beloved number 45 is in office, that's going to be a whole lot going on that's going to help us to keep religious liberty alive. Because he just amazed me. I mean, every day, every time he tweets, it's another thing that's related to religious liberty somewhere. All right? Is there any other hands up? All right? Yes. Mm-hmm.
We should also try to, as much as possible, find the resources that are outside. I know Kevin mentioned that the Baptist Joint Committee.
Yes.
There's a lot of information online within the church and outside the church. You can sign up for a lot of the online services through the church, through the North American Division, or even through the South Atlantic Division, where you would be able to get additional information as it relates to religious liberty, not just a special announcement, but regular updates, regular things that are happening. And if you're plugged in, all you have to do is sign up one time, and they will send you all the information on a regular basis, so you wouldn't have to be looking for anything. You will be able to use information and just like quotation marks, you're not plagiarizing anything. You're just sharing that information with your church, your congregation. So get on these lists. I think that's a great way for us to get all the resources that we need.
Absolutely.
Can he give you his address, the church address now while he's here? So when you go back, you all already have